Remember when God tells Noah to go into the ark because the flood is coming in 7 days? Why is there that 7-day waiting period? And what's the deal with Noah bringing 7 pairs of clean animals onto the ark? Also notice how Noah's ark seems to be an image of something we've already seen in Genesis 1 and 2. Because this is not the first time we've seen this idea. And there's a reason that we see this idea repeating here at the flood story. So let's dive into Genesis chapter 7 verse 4 through 9. Genesis 7:4 says, "For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth, 40 days and 40 nights. I just want to highlight the 40 day, 40 nights, 7 day, and every living thing I have made, I will blot out from the face of the ground." If I were to take 2 words and summarize this chapter of Genesis, I'd use the word taken and the word left. Taken and left, or destruction and preservation. To summarize this chapter, Noah finishes the ark. 7 days before the flood, God tells Noah to bring his family and the animals into the ark. God brings the floodwaters onto the land to destroy all life, and the waters prevail for 150 days. Go watch the previous episode for key words, key ideas to look for, as well as brand new ideas that we're seeing in this chapter. I'm going to pick it up in verse 4. Back to verse 1 of chapter 7. The Lord said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and all your household. I've seen you righteous before me in this generation." Why did God tell Noah to go into the ark 7 days before the flood actually would happen? Why did God give him a 7-day heads up? Was that how much time was required to get everything ready and in order on the ark and to make preparation for just taking on the flood hitting the ark? Like, why the 7-day waiting period? And here's what I want us to think through. This number is incredibly important. It really is. The number 7 notes completion. The significance of the number 7 so far, let's just think so far in the story. 7 chapters into Genesis, what have we seen when it comes to the number 7? Well, God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th day. So there's that 7-day creation period technically. In this story, God is waiting for these 6 days to bring destruction on the land and to bring about a kind of anti-creation, a decreation on the 7th day. So instead of God being done creating, let me say it differently. Instead of God finishing creation on the 7th day and resting, God begins the flood and the cleansing of the world on the 7th day to mark something new. Think about that contrast there. God himself links this moment back to the original creation story by saying this: "In 7 days I'm going to send rain on the earth, 40 days, 40 nights. So there's that day and night motif in the Genesis story, the emphasis on the land of the earth and the ground, but also the fact that God has made every living thing that he's about to blot out. There's just a few correlations to the original creation story in Genesis 1 and 2, but this right here seems like an unnecessary detail. So this is why I go here. When I read the story and I go, every living thing that I have made, he could have just said every living thing or all life, but God intentionally says every living thing I've made, noting his hand in creating those things, how those things originate in him. And we have to ask why. Why is God linking this moment here in the flood story back to the original creation story by letting us know, yes, I'm the one who brought about all life, because he's about to destroy all life now. And here's what I want to say about the number 7 before we jump into the following verses. This, I think, is foundational. The number 7 represents completion, and it's something that we've seen with creation as well as the holy Sabbath day God blesses as a day of rest. We've seen the number 7 as it relates to the 7-fold vengeance for Cain in Genesis 4. We've seen the 7 pairs of clean animals right here, 7 pairs of birds rather, as well as the 7 pairs of clean animals. So there has been you can even go a little further into the story in Genesis. You can look at Joseph's story, the Joseph story. Why can't I talk today? And Pharaoh's dreams. Pharaoh specifically dreams about 7 cows, 7 skinny cows, 7 fat cows. Then another dream, 7 full stalks of grain and 7 withering stalks of grain. Jacob serves Laban 7 years. And then we can go even further into the story. Joshua walks around the walls 7 days with 7 priests and 7 trumpets. And 7 times they walk around on the last day, the 7th day. There's many more examples, okay? So I just want to note that, yes, the number 7 does note completion and is significant throughout the biblical story. Something else important to note is the presence of the 7-day period. So for instance, in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, we see the 7-day creation period, where on the seventh day God rests. Now here's what I want to really connect us to. In Exodus, I was reading this just this morning and it clicked for me. In Exodus 29, actually I'm going to hold that thought, pull it back in. In Exodus, God gives the people of Israel the 7-day period where they only eat unleavened bread starting on Passover from the 14th to the 21st day. In Exodus, we also see the 7-day ordination period for the high priest and his sons. So Aaron and his sons are ordained, they're commissioned, they're consecrated, and they're anointed. Okay, so there's a 7-day ordination period for the high priest and his sons to enter into service to God. And for 7 days, they're wearing the garments that have been fashioned skillfully. For 7 days, the altar is being consecrated and atoned for, while Aaron and his sons enjoy that 7-day period of sort of feasting with the Lord. There's an interesting connection to note between here and that Exodus story. In Exodus chapter 29, we see that ordination period for the high priest and his sons. And this 7-day high priest ordination period, I want us to think through this, it involves 3 specific things being consecrated. So during that 7-day period, while the high priest and his sons are kind of waiting to enter into service, there are 3 things being consecrated. There's going to be the altar. It's being made atonement for. The people, Aaron and his sons, so the altar and the people are being consecrated during that period. And then at the end of that, we're going to see the sacred space, the tabernacle, be consecrated where the high priest and his sons will serve God. So those 3 things. And then right smack dab in the middle, we have a time of judgment upon the wicked, where the rebellious Israelites within the nation are actually judged and destroyed. The Levites come in, purge 3,000, the nation of 3,000 men after the whole golden calf debacle. Remember, they make a golden calf and they bow down. After that, the Levites come in, clean house, purge that nation of 3,000 men. And then after that, it actually says that God brings a plague upon the people. And the reason I'm making this connection is because here's why. The Levites are ordained for service through that act of faithfulness to God. And if that's not a strong enough case, I would like to liken that to a mini flood, where God removes the wicked from that space to continue with the people who are left over in that nation. So it's a kind of mini flood. But if that's not a strong enough case, in Exodus chapter 32, verse 35, to follow the golden calf story, God is going to send a plague on the people for their idolatry. Just like he sends a flood here, God sends a plague as a consequence and as punishment for their idolatry and rebellion. Just like we see God sending a flood here to remove the wicked in Genesis 7. So again, I'm just trying to keep this all succinct. In Exodus 29, the 7-day period was God consecrating the altar, the people for service, and the space itself. And then before the space is consecrated at the end of Exodus, the tabernacle, we see God bring the plague upon the wicked for their rebellious idolatry and evil. And we see those same components here too. Because the question becomes, why did God wait 7 days to bring the flood? Why that 7-day waiting period? And I see correlation between this 7-day waiting period and the 7-day consecration kind of anointing period for the high priest and his sons in Exodus 29. Okay, so we don't immediately, here's what I want to note. God takes a few people here in Genesis 9, attached to one man, that being Noah, and he puts them in a sort of floating safe place, a sanctuary of sorts, and then we see the flood come and take away the wicked. Okay, so we see the component of a sacred space, a set-apart people who will be brought through the judgment and through the waters of death into new life on the other side. We see God bring the flood upon the wicked, and we don't immediately see the altar yet being consecrated. So that aspect of, well, what about the altar? You said in Exodus 25 the altar's consecrated. Well, after the flood subsides and Noah comes out, Noah will offer sacrifices to God on the altar. And almost as if Noah has come through the flood and, been preserved by the grace of God to be consecrated for that priestly service unto God. The same way we see Aaron and his sons in Exodus 29. So the idea of God consecrating a sacred space here would be the ark, where a consecrated people, remnant, Noah and his family, are preserved to come out and offer sacrifices to God, that being Noah. almost as if playing this high priestly role. In other words, this 7-day period here in Genesis 7, while Noah and his family are waiting for the flood to come, the reason God warns them, and the reason we see this 7-day waiting period, is because this time period might involve a time of consecration, preparation, and we can even see the flood as a sort of cleansing and washing of the earth to make way for new life through Noah and his family. So I just want to put all that out there, all that information, and essentially say, go read Exodus 29 and Exodus 32 and then Exodus 40. Take all three of those chapters and then come back here to Genesis chapter 7 and see if you notice any correlation, because I sure did. I was wondering why the 7-day waiting period, and I know we haven't gotten to the text itself, but that's all just background. The statement God makes about removing, blotting out from the face of the ground all the life that he's made brings us back to when God made the ground creatures and placed them on the land in Genesis chapter 1. And through Adam's curse, we see the ground ends up being cursed, and man would return to the ground in death from which he came. So this idea of God taking life from the ground and, certain animals and Noah being left alive on the face of the earth, it brings us back to the original idea of the ground and the land, where God brought Adam up from the ground and God brought the life of the land creatures from the ground. But now, this is not God bringing life from the ground here in Genesis 7. This is actually God taking life from the land and bringing it back into the ground from which it came. God made mankind and earth creatures from the dust of the ground, and now they're returning to it by God's decree, just like God said when Adam received the just penalty in Genesis 3 and the ground was cursed. Also, a question I have is, what was God doing for these 7 days of waiting? Hey, in 7 days, I'm going to send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. How come God didn't bring the flood down immediately after Noah? Presumably, some people might read this as Noah goes into the ark immediately, and then he kind of sits there for 7 days. I don't see that, and I'm not versed enough in Hebrew to actually note the verb tenses and such, but I will say, I see Noah going in on the 7th day with his family, and then God shuts them in, and the flood comes. So, if you read it differently, then I have a question for people who go, well, he went in immediately. How come God didn't bring the flood down immediately after Noah had gone into the ark? Why that kind of waiting? For God to blot out the creatures here that inhabited the land apparently required 40 days and 40 nights of rain. And we go, why 40 days and 40 nights? In the Bible, the number 40 notes a time of testing very often. For instance, Jesus is in the wilderness for 40 days being tested. Israel's tested for 40 years in the wilderness. Goliath is taunting Israel for 40 days and mocking God. There's a sort of testing within that. Moses is on the mountain with God for 40 days, and Israel's put under a test. Will they be faithful? Will they not be? They didn't pass. Ezekiel lays on his side for 40 days as a sign of Judah's punishment. There's a 40-day time of mourning for Job. 40 days Israel is spying out the land of Canaan to see if it's going to be what they think, and then they bring back word. That's a time of testing. God told Nineveh through Jonah, 40 days and judgment's coming. That was a time for them to be tested, to be either faithful or not, to respond in faith or not. Jesus spent 40 days testifying and teaching after his resurrection, which seems to be a kind of testing for those who do not yet believe. But either way, the number 40 does carry that idea of testing. And this here, the 40 days and 40 nights, does note that here as well. The reference to the days and the nights, I see another correlation to the Genesis story of creation, where God, in the evening, in the morning, the first day, and then the evening, in the morning, the second day. You see that pattern. I see a correlation to that, a reference to the days of creation. But in this case, it's God destroying the old world to bring about a new one, rather than consecutively creating the world day after day until day 7. Real quick, if you don't know me, my name is Jason, and I have some free gifts for you at AboveReproachMinistry.com. Go to the website or click the links in the description below to check out all of our free Bible study resources. We have online Bible classes, devotional studies, Bible study workshops, all of my sermon notes, and more. You can even join our online church community on the Discord app. We also have discussion groups all around the world, and if you don't see one in your area, message me and we'll help you start a launch group. I personally lead a a group in Spartanburg, South Carolina. If you live in the area, we'd love to have you join us on Fridays for Bible study. So contact me if you're interested, and if you or your church would like me to come preach or teach, just message me or shoot me an email and we'll see what we can do, because I love preaching in person. If you're a new follower of Jesus, click the New Believers section to access everything we recommend for new believers. And be sure to snag a copy of my book, Fruitful, to support this ministry. All right, that's all I got for you. Let's jump back into the video. Also, if you go down to verse 5, we're finally moving on to verse 5. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. And this is not the first time we see this statement. Noah did all the Lord commanded him. We see that in chapter 6, verse 22 as well. So this is the second time. The idea of Noah building the ark. Just thinking about God, Noah has done all that God has commanded him. The idea of Noah finishing and building the ark is reminiscent of God creating the earth and finishing that in 6 days, then resting on the seventh. So I do see a correlation to that as well. God finishes creating in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rests. Well, Noah here has finished building the ark, and now there's that 7-day waiting period until the floodwaters come. And it's as if Noah entering in on the seventh day is a kind of rest. Entering into the kind of rest that God provides found and contained in the ark. Just like God rests from his work on the seventh day, we see the presence of 7 days here as well. Then Noah will come out of the ark into a kind of new world, or a new creation, you might say, where God starts over with him and his family, just as God did with Adam and Eve. When God placed Adam and Eve in the garden, they enter into a state of rest, like they're created in a condition of rest, entering into God's rest. Also, the scripture does repeat exactly what we see in chapter 6, verse 22. Noah did all that God commanded him, but in that case, it was Noah building the ark. In this case, it's actually Noah entering into the ark and in obedience to God's word and taking with him. Now he's taken his family and the animals and the 7 pairs of clean and the 7 pairs of birds. And so far there are 2 stages to Noah's obedience. The first stage is Noah builds what God says to build. The second stage is Noah is finished the ark, and now he's going to bring the animals and his family into what has been completed. So we go, why does the text almost verbatim state what was noted in chapter 6? Why is there an emphasis on Noah did what God commanded? I think we're supposed to see just a faithful, obedient man. Not a perfect man, but a faithful, obedient one. Noah was 600 years old. It's an old fella. When the floodwaters came upon the earth, emphasis once again on the land or the ground, experiencing the floodwaters God brings. So a question I have is, why do I care how old Noah is when the floodwaters come, when we don't even know when he started building the ark or even when he finished? Just because God comes to him in the beginning of chapter 7 and says, hey, floodwaters are coming, that doesn't mean he just finished building the ark. There could have been a long gap. We don't know how long how much time has transpired since Noah finished the ark, and then God comes to him and goes, bro, in 7 days. We don't know how much time has passed. So I have a question. What is the connection between Noah's years here being 600 and the flood of destruction coming upon the land and the ground? Seeing how Noah's age is a multiple of 6, and we think of 6 as usually the number of man. Also in verse 6, God said he would send rain, yet in the next 2 verses, we see the rain referenced to as floodwaters, right here. The flood waters. The flood waters. But if you go to verse 4, God says, I will send rain on the earth. Not to say that God lied or there's disagreement in the text, but I'm just wondering why that change in how he refers to the waters that are coming. First it's rain, now it's floodwaters. The 2 references are the same, and they're 2 ways of referring to the same idea for sure. But why the 2 different ways of referring to what God is sending on the earth? What does it highlight about this story in this moment to say that the flood waters are coming? When God said, I'm sending rain, and Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Notice what they're doing. They're escaping. They're going into the ark. And look at who they're with. They're with Noah. And I think that's super important. They're not going on their own. They're attached to one who was deemed righteous in the sight of God. Noah and his family are described as escaping the flood by going into the ark. The ark here is viewed as a sort of safe haven or salvation from death and destruction. And God, this is what I really want to hammer down. God does not keep the flood far away from Noah and his family. God actually brings Noah and his family safely through the flood waters. He doesn't bring them around the flood to completely avoid it. And this just screams the parting of the Red Sea story, where God doesn't bring the Israelites the route you think they would, that he would bring them. He brings them directly to the waters where he'd have to part them in order to bring them through to the other side. The idea here is they do escape the destruction of the flood. Why can't I talk today? They do escape the flood and the destruction, but not the presence of the flood. It still happens around them, but they go safely through it inside the ark. So this is a statement. The reason why I bring this up is because this is a statement about how God is not a refuge away from the storm and away from destruction. He's a refuge and a safe haven in the midst of it. God could have done this any other way and brought them super far, done something else, but he gave them a safe place in the middle of the flood, not far away from it. And so I just want to highlight the fact that God provides safety and salvation and peace and refuge right in the middle of chaos and death. And this is exactly what Jesus is to us. He is our eternal salvation, not later, but right now, presently in the midst of this broken world, and eventually when we go through death, he's our way through that to life on the other side. We don't avoid death, we go through it. We don't avoid trials and tribulations, we go through it. God doesn't bring us far away from it, he brings us through it, and he's our safe haven in the midst of it. This just speaks to how God doesn't always take his people far from issues and problems, but God does promise to be what we need in the midst of whatever he brings us through. In order to escape the flood, they had to listen to God's voice. Look at Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him went into the ark. Well, what did God tell Noah to tell his family? Tell them to go into the ark with you. So they had a choice. Just as much as Noah did, just as much as everyone else on the planet did, they had a choice. Will we listen to what God has told Noah and obey, or will we not? But if they wanted to escape, they had to listen. It was not enough for Noah to build the ark and stand and go, whoa. They wouldn't be saved by standing back and admiring the hard work of their father and what he had built. Presumably, even if they had helped Noah build the ark, which the text never actually says, if they had helped their father build the ark, even so, they're not saved by standing back and priding themselves in what they had built with their own hands. They had to actually trust God and listen to his voice again. So one moment of obedience wasn't sufficient. Here's a new opportunity to actually obey and trust God's voice. And you can't rely on when you obeyed God in the past. Now is a new opportunity. Noah, here's what I want to say about this. Obedience doesn't just happen one time. Obedience is a continual lifestyle. Noah obeyed God each time God commanded him. And it might have felt and looked somewhat ridiculous to not only build the ark, but to potentially, depending on how you read the text, if he went in 7 days before it even started raining, that looks ridiculous. And the text doesn't say Noah was or wasn't mocked or persecuted or ridiculed by anyone, but there's a chance, there's a possibility. And obedience will often look ridiculous to people who don't believe or trust in God the way we do. Noah's family is only safe because they go into the ark with Noah. This is the key phrase. It just brings me back to Jesus. It's a statement about their relationship to Noah. It's a statement about their proximity to Noah, their attachment to Noah. And this is what happens when we believe in Jesus. Ephesians tells us we are spiritually positioned in Jesus through faith, so that we are safe through him and in him. He's our refuge and salvation. We're safe from death and destruction. And even if we go through it, he's our way to the other side. And we'll see the same idea throughout Scripture, where God will bless and protect those who are attached to the one that he has chosen. Whether it's Moses and the people of Israel crossing through the Red Sea, whether it's the people following Joshua into the promised land through the Jordan River, whether it's the household of Abraham and his offspring, being attached to Abraham, whether it's the nation of Israel and any Gentile converts who want to come into God's chosen nation. There's this theme of the ones God has chosen, or the one God has chosen, and then those who latch themselves on to and have relationship with that chosen one, they get to walk through and be safe with that chosen one. And that theme culminates in Jesus. We're going to end in verse 9, of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds and of everything that creeps on the ground. 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah as God had commanded Noah. Look at the animals that are described. Clean, not clean. Those that creep, those that are birds. I have a question. We see the emphasis once again on creatures being what? With Noah. With Noah. Not just his family, but the animals too. The point is that Noah is the righteous one in God's sight. Not to make him perfect, not to make him some Christ, type. Well, he does foreshadow Jesus in some ways, but he's not a savior and a Messiah. But he does, in some ways, foreshadow Jesus. Noah's the righteous one in God's sight, and the blessing and favor on Noah for protection and salvation is extended to anyone or anything that would join him in the ark. So the question becomes for me as we close, why does the author of Genesis here refer to the animals as being clean, unclean, birds, and then things that creep on the ground? Genesis 1 and 2 seems to give us different categories to distinguish between creeping things, beasts of the earth, the land creatures, and yet here it seems to either just kind of capture all the land creatures in one category as those that creep on the ground. That's one thing. That's one possibility. Or the author is intentionally mentioning only the land creatures that creep on the ground with the birds and clean and unclean animals. Another option is that the clean/unclean animals is actually a statement about the beasts of the earth and the land creatures. But I just want to note that the author chooses here to refer to the animals in this way when they go with Noah into the ark. But the text has no problem telling us when we see beasts of the earth or cattle or ground creatures versus those ground creatures that creep on the earth. There is a distinction. And for some reason, they're either left out here intentionally or they're mentioned within one of these categories in passing and they're just summed up. I don't know what's going on there. But we'll see when we get to the rest of this chapter, the animals referred to a little differently. And that's when I'll kind of bring us back to verse 8. So hold on to that, put a pin in it. And in fact, if you want to do your homework, read up to verse 16. That's going to be your homework. If you really want to get ahead in preparation for the video, read up to verse 16 and see if you notice any other ways the animals are referred to or any other categories that are given for the animal kingdom. That's all I got for you guys today. This has been a longer video, so I apologize. Let me know in the comments your thoughts, questions, insights, revelations, connections, whatever it is. Be kind, be respectful. Be respectful. Don't make fun of the fact that I can't talk today for some reason. Pray for me. And I'll see you guys in the next Bible study walkthrough. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to share your thoughts and your insights in the comments. If you want to share your thoughts and questions about these studies, join us every Thursday evening at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for a live discussion together. And thank you for supporting this ministry. Your support helps us accomplish our mission, which is to teach people how to read the Bible so they can live and teach it for themselves. We're only able to make all of these free resources because of generous supporters like you. So thank you very much for all of your support. Make sure to visit AboveReproachMinistry.com to check out all of our free resources. And as always, keep moving towards Jesus.